The autumn of 1891 had settled upon London with particular melancholy, wrapping Baker Street in a shroud of yellow fog that seemed to muffle not only sound, but the very spirits of those who ventured through its murky embrace. Within the familiar sanctuary of our lodgings at 221B, however, warmth and light prevailed. The fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting dancing shadows upon the walls lined with Holmes's eclectic collection of reference works, while the detective himself sat hunched over his chemical apparatus, absorbed in some arcane analysis that filled the room with the sharp, acrid scent of his experiments. I had just settled into my customary chair with the evening edition of the Times, grateful for the domestic tranquility that had blessed us for nearly a fortnight, when the familiar sound of hurried footsteps upon our 17 stairs announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Hudson's knock came sharp and urgent, followed immediately by her entrance without waiting for permission, a breach of protocol that instantly alerted both Holmes and myself to the gravity of the situation. "Mr. Holmes," she announced breathlessly, her usually composed demeanor betrayed by the flush in her cheeks. "There's a gentleman below who insists upon seeing you immediately. Says it's a matter of life and death, and he won't be turned away. He gave me this card and begged me to bring it up directly." Holmes set down his test tube with deliberate precision, his gray eyes already sharpening with that peculiar intensity I'd witnessed countless times when a case of genuine interest presented itself. He examined the calling card with the same methodical attention he might give to a crucial piece of evidence. "Sir Roderick Allardyce of Bedford Square," he read aloud, his voice carrying a note of recognition. "The shipping magnate, Watson, a man whose word carries considerable weight in both commercial and political circles." He glanced up at Mrs. Hudson. "Show him up immediately, and perhaps you would be so kind as to prepare tea. I suspect our visitor has endured considerable strain." The haunted baronet. The man who entered our sitting room bore little resemblance to the confident industrialist whose name appeared regularly in the financial pages. Sir Roderick Allardyce was a tall, distinguished gentleman of perhaps 50 years, with iron-grey hair and the bearing of one accustomed to command. Yet his usual composure had clearly been shattered by some profound shock. His face was pale as parchment, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands, normally steady enough to sign contracts worth thousands of pounds, trembled visibly as he removed his gloves. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he began, his cultured voice hoarse with exhaustion, "I apologize for this unseasonable intrusion, but I find myself confronted by circumstances that defy all rational explanation. Scotland Yard has declared my case closed, yet I fear that justice has not been served, and more troubling still, I believe supernatural forces may be at work in my very home." Holmes gestured toward the chair opposite mine, his expression betraying neither skepticism nor credulity. "Pray, take a seat by the fire, Sir Roderick. The chill of the evening seems to have affected you profoundly, or perhaps it is something far more serious than mere weather that troubles you. Watson, would you be so kind as to pour our guest some brandy?" Sir Roderick accepted the spirits gratefully, though I noticed his hands continued to shake as he raised the glass to his lips. "It concerns my family estate in Bedford Square, Mr. Holmes. Specifically, it involves what we have come to call the Rose Room, a chamber that was destroyed by fire exactly 1 year ago yesterday, claiming the life of my beloved wife, Lady Margaret." The name stirred a memory, and I found myself recalling the brief newspaper accounts of the tragedy that had befallen one of London's most prominent families. Lady Margaret Allardyce, daughter of the Earl of Westmere, had perished in a house fire under circumstances that had briefly captured public attention before being overshadowed by other events. "The fire was ruled accidental," Sir Roderick continued, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flames in our hearth as if seeking answers in their movement. Margaret was in her private sitting room, the Rose Room as she called it for the garden roses painted upon the walls, after dinner. There were candles burning, a small fire in the grate against the autumn chill. The servant's bell rope was within easy reach of her favorite chair. I was in my study below with my secretary, Mr. Peregrine Vale, reviewing some business correspondence. He paused, drawing a shuddering breath. The first indication of trouble was the smell of smoke and a woman's cry. We rushed upstairs to find the door locked from the inside. By the time we forced our way in, the room was engulfed in flames. Margaret, my dear Margaret, had fallen near her escritoire, overcome by the smoke. A broken lamp lay beside her, which the authorities took to be the cause of the blaze. "And the coroner's verdict?" Holmes inquired gently. "Death by suffocation due to accidental fire," Sir Roderick replied bitterly. "The room was gutted, the contents destroyed. We sealed it immediately afterward, boarded the door, bricked up the windows. It seemed the proper thing to do, a kind of tomb for her memory. Until a fortnight ago, it remained untouched." The impossible manifestations. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose I knew so well. "And what occurred a fortnight ago to disturb this sealed chamber?" "We decided to restore the room," Sir Roderick explained, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My niece, Miss Iris Vance, Margaret's brother's daughter, has come to live with us following her parents' death in India. She's a gentle soul, much like Margaret was, and we thought to prepare the rose room for her use." The workmen removed the boards from the door and began clearing away the debris. He set down his brandy with hands that shook so violently the glass rattled against the table. "That very night, Mr. Holmes, the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustling of silk or the sighing of wind through leaves, but they grew clearer, more distinct, human voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones from within that empty, fire-damaged room." "Who first reported these manifestations?" I asked, my medical training prompting me to consider the possibilities of shared hysteria or suggestion. "Mrs. Larkin, my housekeeper, a woman of unshakable nerve who has served our family for 30 years. She dismissed it initially as imagination, the creaking of old timbers settling. But then Blount, my butler, heard them as well. And then—" Sir Roderick's voice trailed off, his eyes wide with remembered terror. "Then my niece heard them, and she went white as death. 'Uncle,' she whispered, clutching my arm, 'someone is calling your name. Someone is saying Roderick over and over again.'" Holmes's grey eyes had taken on that sharp, predatory gleam that I recognized as the sign of his complete engagement with the puzzle. "You investigated personally, I assume?" "Of course. We examined every inch of that room, the door, the boarded windows, the walls themselves. There was no entrance, no hidden passage, no possible way for anyone to be concealed within. Yet the whispers continued, night after night, growing more distinct. Sometimes a single voice, sometimes what seemed like multiple speakers engaged in urgent conversation. And the nature of these whispers, Holmes pressed, could you discern any words, any patterns? Sir Roderick ran a trembling hand through his hair. That is perhaps the most disturbing aspect, Mr. Holmes. At first, they were unintelligible, mere murmurs and sighs. But gradually, certain words became clear. My name, as Iris reported. Margaret's name. And most chilling of all, the phrase "not finished" repeated again and again, as if some task remained incomplete. The impossible evidence. But that is not all, Sir Roderick continued, his voice now barely audible. 3 nights ago, the servants' bellboard in the corridor rang 3 times, the signal for the Rose Room. Yet that bell cord was severed during the fire and has remained disconnected all this time. Mrs. Larkin and I both witnessed it, the brass indicator dropping and rising thrice, clear as day. Holmes straightened in his chair, his interest clearly piqued by this tangible detail. You examined the bell mechanism? Immediately. Mr. Vale accompanied me to the basement where the wires terminate. The Rose Room cord has been cut and tied off since the fire. There is no possible way it could have activated that bell. yet we both saw it ring. "And last night?" Holmes inquired, for I could see in his expression that he sensed there was more to come. Sir Roderick's composure finally cracked entirely. "Last night, Mr. Holmes, I stationed myself outside the Rose Room door, determined to solve this mystery once and for all. I sat in the corridor from 11 o'clock onward, armed with a lamp and my service revolver. The whispers came and went like waves upon a shore, sometimes clear enough that I could almost make out words, sometimes fading to mere sighs." He buried his face in his hands. "At midnight, something struck my lamp. Not hard, but with a sound like pebbles thrown against glass. The light flickered, and there came over me a strange smell, sharp and sickly, like a blown-out candle mixed with something else, something I cannot name. I felt a sudden giddiness, a choking sensation in my throat. When I recovered my senses, Blount was supporting me, and there upon the door panel—" "Yes?" Holmes prompted gently. "A handprint, Mr. Holmes, clear as life, pressed in what appeared to be soot or ash. Not a complete hand, but the heel of the palm and 3 fingers, the little finger missing. Just as Margaret's little finger was missing the top joint from a riding accident in her youth." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of our fire and the distant sounds of London's evening traffic. I confess that a chill ran down my spine at this recitation, for while my rational mind sought prosaic explanations, the accumulation of impossible details was deeply unsettling. Holmes, however, showed no sign of supernatural dread. Instead, his eyes blazed with the cold fire of intellectual challenge. "Most fascinating," he murmured, rising to pace before the fireplace. "A sealed room that speaks, a severed bell cord that rings, a handprint that appears from nowhere, and a scent that accompanies these manifestations. Sir Roderick, you present us with a puzzle of considerable complexity." "Then you will take the case?" Sir Roderick asked, hope flickering in his exhausted features. "Indeed I will," Holmes replied, turning to face our visitor with a slight smile. "For when men tell me that effects occur without causes, I am compelled to search for undiscovered causes. There is a very human intelligence behind these manifestations, Sir Roderick, and a very human purpose. The whispers speak of something not finished, and I intend to discover precisely what that might be." He moved to the window, gazing out into the fog-shrouded street. "Watson, I trust you have no pressing engagements tomorrow? It appears we shall be making an expedition to Bedford Square to investigate this most intriguing case of the room that burned last year, yet continues to harbour secrets among its ashes." As Sir Roderick's relief became visible across his haggard features, I found myself wondering what rational explanation could possibly account for such a collection of seemingly supernatural phenomena. Yet I had learned, through long association, with Holmes that the most impossible mysteries often yielded to careful observation and logical deduction. The game, as my friend would say, was most decidedly afoot. The morning following Sir Roderick's extraordinary visit found Holmes already seated at our breakfast table, his sharp profile silhouetted against the window as he examined several sheets of closely written notes. The remnants of his morning meal lay forgotten beside him, testament to his complete absorption in the puzzling case that had presented itself the previous evening. "Ah, Watson," he said without turning, "I trust you slept better than I did. You appear to have enjoyed a pleasant evening despite the circumstances. A new book, judging by the faint scent of fresh paper and the slight ink stain on your index finger, accompanied by a rather fine Bordeaux, given the subtle aroma that still clings to your waistcoat." I set down my coffee cup in amazement. "Good heavens, Holmes. Indeed, I received Conan Doyle's latest from my old friend Stamford, along with a bottle of his finest claret. But how could you possibly—" "Elementary observation, my dear fellow," Holmes replied with a slight smile. "The world is full of such revealing details if one knows where to look. And so it shall be with our whispering room. The question is not whether these manifestations occurred, but how they were accomplished, and more importantly, why someone wishes us to believe in supernatural intervention. He rose, stretching his lean frame. Come, Watson. The time has arrived to examine this remarkable chamber and meet the household that has witnessed these impossible events. The November fog had lifted sufficiently to reveal Bedford Square in all its Georgian grandeur, though a persistent drizzle lent the elegant facades a melancholy aspect. The Allardyce residence presented an imposing front of honey-coloured stone, its tall windows reflecting the grey sky like watchful eyes. A sense of expectancy seemed to emanate from the very bricks, as if the house itself awaited our arrival. Blount, the butler, received us in the entrance hall, a thick-set man with bloodshot eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and frayed nerves. Behind him stood a young woman in mourning dress, whose delicate features bore a striking resemblance to the late Lady Margaret. "I am Iris Vance," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious pallor. "Uncle Roderick attends to correspondence with Mr. Vale, but will join us presently. Please consider the house at your disposal." Holmes bowed slightly. "Miss Vance, your composure does you credit. I understand you have been most affected by these recent manifestations?" "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, the whispers grow stronger each night, and they seem to respond to human presence. When I approached the Rose Room door 2 evenings past, they became more agitated, more urgent. It was then I heard Uncle Roderick's name called repeatedly. Most illuminating," Holmes murmured. At that moment, a spare gentleman of perhaps 35 years approached, his pale, quick eyes taking our measure with evident intelligence. "Mr. Peregrine Vale," Miss Vance introduced, "Uncle's secretary and trusted confidant." Vale inclined his head. "Gentlemen, I confess myself skeptical of supernatural explanations, yet I cannot deny what I have witnessed. The bellboard incident particularly troubles me. I heard a distinct metallic click before each drop of the indicator." "Your ear serves you well," Holmes observed approvingly. "Mrs. Larkin?" The housekeeper materialized as if summoned, a square, competent woman with red arms and shrewd eyes that weighed us carefully. 30 years I've served this family, sir, and never seen the like. The sounds come strongest between 11 and midnight, like voices in urgent conversation." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "The bell mechanism. You examined it thoroughly?" "Aye, sir," Blount replied. "Willoughby and Fenn cut and tied the Rose Room wire after the fire. No earthly way it could ring that bell." "Yet ring it did," Holmes mused. "Now, I must examine the corridor and the sealed room itself. But first," he turned to Mrs. Larkin, "I shall require a lamp, a length of twine, a small mirror, and a tin of fine salt." "Salt, sir." "A simple detector of disturbances," he replied with characteristic inscrutability. Sir Roderick appeared at that moment, wan but determined, greeting us warmly. "Mr. Holmes, you find us in considerable distress, but I shall answer whatever questions you require." "Only this," Holmes said. "Was there any matter left unfinished at the time of Lady Margaret's death? Correspondence, legal affairs, personal business?" Sir Roderick considered carefully. Her affairs were in order, though she had mentioned writing to her brother in India. Whether that letter was ever sent, I cannot say. "A letter?" Holmes repeated softly, his grey eyes sharpening with interest. We proceeded along the corridor toward the Rose Room, where Holmes paused, drawing the air through his nostrils with delicate precision. "Phosphorus," he whispered to me. "Not from matches, from paint or paste. Someone seeks to create luminescence in darkness, Watson. The game grows more intriguing by the moment." The corridor leading to the Rose Room possessed an almost sepulchral quality, as if the very air had been stilled by tragedy. Holmes approached the sealed door with the measured precision of a surgeon, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail from the placement of gas fixtures to the worn patterns in the Persian runner beneath our feet. He knelt first to examine the carpet, producing his magnifying glass to study what appeared to my untrained eye as merely normal wear. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, tracing invisible patterns with his finger. These slight depressions in the pile, regular intervals, approximately 18 inches apart. Someone has traversed this corridor repeatedly, yet with unusual care to distribute their weight evenly, as one might do when attempting to minimize sound. Rising, he turned his attention to the door itself, where the mysterious handprint remained visible against the darkened wood. From his coat, he produced the tin of salt Mrs. Larkin had provided, sprinkling a thin, precise line along the threshold and base of the door. An old technique for detecting air currents, he explained to our assembled audience. Should there be hidden passages or concealed openings, the salt will reveal them through movement. He then knelt and applied his ear to the lower panel, drawing a long breath through his nostrils with that peculiar delicacy which had so often revealed to him scents undreamed of by less instructed senses. "Phosphorus," he whispered to me. "Not from matches. Something more deliberate. A compound designed to create luminescence in darkness." Taking the small mirror Mrs. Larkin had brought, Holmes slid it flat against the boards and, with a yard of twine tied to its handle, edged it beneath the door until it lay within the blackened chamber. By angling his lamp, we obtained our first glimpse of the room's interior, charred flooring ribbed with warped joists, the remains of a small hearth choked with clinker, and near the door, a jagged stump of bell cord hanging like a withered vine from the wall. "The handprint itself presents several curiosities," Holmes continued, withdrawing the mirror and examining the door panel closely. "Note how the substance has penetrated the wood grain in some areas while remaining superficial in others, most suggestive of deliberate application rather than random supernatural deposit. Moreover, it appears on the exterior of the door, not the interior where one might expect a trapped spirit to place it." With the assistance of Blount and a crowbar, we removed the heavy planks securing the entrance. The door swung open with a protesting groan, releasing a thick, cloying mixture of charred wood, damp plaster, and something indefinably stale that made us all instinctively step back. The rose room revealed itself as a desolate shell, its walls scorched black, with ghostly traces of painted roses still clinging to patches of blistered paneling. Holmes stepped inside with cat-like grace, his movements deliberate and economical. The floor was covered in a thick layer of ash and soot that muffled our footsteps and reflected no light. He crouched low, running a gloved hand over the debris, studying patterns invisible to the rest of us. "Most illuminating," he commented. "The ash dispersal shows clear signs of recent disturbance, particularly around what would have been the hearth and near the corner where Lady Margaret's escritoire stood. And here," he pointed to a faint depression in the ash, "an indentation too large for a mouse, too small for a boot, almost as if something slender and metallic had been pressed down with considerable force." He spent considerable time examining the fireplace, meticulously brushing away ash to reveal the stone beneath. "The flue appears to have been recently disturbed, Watson. Note this fine layer of fresh soot on the hearth. Most curious for a room sealed for a year." "Mr. Holmes," Miss Vance ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I heard the voices, they seemed to come from multiple locations simultaneously. Sometimes near the door, sometimes from the direction of the windows, occasionally from the fireplace area." "Indeed, Miss Vance, your observation aligns perfectly with what I am discovering." Holmes indicated several tiny holes in the wainscoting, barely visible unless one knew where to look. "These apertures have been recently drilled, then carefully concealed with wood putty and stain. They create a network that could carry both sound and other substances through hollow spaces between the walls." We proceeded next to examine the servant's bell board, where Holmes studied the mechanism with intense concentration. "You heard a distinct click, Mr. Vale?" "Indeed, sir, like the release of a spring." Holmes produced his lens and examined the pivot carefully. "Over-oiled with fish oil, if I do not err. Mrs. Larkin, when did you last maintain these mechanisms?" "I dust them daily, sir, but haven't oiled a pivot in years." "Most revealing. Mr. Vale, Would you oblige me by pulling the bell of the small parlour?" As Vale complied, I could have sworn the rose room indicator quivered slightly, though it did not drop. "Again, if you please. Gently." This time a tiny metallic tick emanated from within the case. Our expedition to the basement revealed the final piece of this particular puzzle. The severed rose room wire hung neatly knotted and labelled, yet Holmes's examination showed fresh disturbance. "New twine upon the label," he observed, "and the cut end rubbed brighter than its fellows. Someone has been very busy indeed." His hand moved along the beam above the rose wire, coming away with a smear of oil. He plucked an almost invisible filament from the woodwork. "Gut string, I believe. Violin or fishing line. Someone with very delicate fingers has been modifying your bell system, Sir Roderick." Returning to Sir Roderick's study below the rose room, Holmes mounted a chair to examine the cornice until he found a point that gave back a hollow note when tapped. His penknife revealed a tiny bored hole, carefully filled but recently disturbed. "A conduit for sound, at the very least," he murmured. "Watson," he said, turning to me with that expression I knew indicated a crucial deduction, "your medical expertise, if you please. What would you make of Sir Roderick's symptoms during his vigil? The dizziness, choking sensation, and visual disturbances?" I considered the combination carefully. "The symptoms suggest possible exposure to some form of gas or vapor, perhaps carbon monoxide from a faulty flue, or possibly chloroform in small quantities administered to create disorientation." "Precisely my conclusion." Holmes's grey eyes blazed with satisfaction. "We are dealing with someone who possesses both architectural knowledge of this house and access to areas the family considers secure. The whispers are real, the bell did ring, and the handprint was indeed placed upon the door, but the agency behind these events is entirely human, motivated by purposes we have yet to discover." He paused, his expression growing grave. "Someone wishes to create the impression of supernatural activity while simultaneously communicating specific information about letters, about family connections, about matters left unfinished. The question becomes, what truth are they attempting to reveal, and why choose such elaborate deception to accomplish it?" As the afternoon light faded and our preliminary investigation drew to a close, I found myself marveling once again at Holmes's ability to transform apparent impossibilities into logical sequences of human action. Yet the true purpose behind this elaborate charade remained tantalizingly beyond our grasp, promising revelations that would surely test even my friend's remarkable powers of deduction. The following morning found Holmes in a state of methodical concentration, having requested individual interviews with each member of the household. He began with Mrs. Larkin, whose 30 years of faithful service had made her privy to the family's most intimate affairs. The weeks before Lady Margaret's death troubled me greatly. The housekeeper confided, settling her substantial frame into the chair Holmes indicated. She had been receiving letters that seemed to distress her considerably. Foreign postmarks, India, I believe, though she burned them immediately after reading. Most unlike her usual methodical habits, sir. She kept every paper in its proper place, but these she destroyed at once. Holmes leaned forward with evident interest. "These letters, did you observe anything else about them?" "They came with increasing frequency in her final weeks, Mr. Holmes, and they seemed to agitate her terribly. She dismissed her lady's maid early on the night of the fire, saying she wished to be alone with her correspondence. I heard her pacing in the rose room for hours." When Mrs. Larkin departed, Holmes summoned Mr. Vale, whose pale, intelligent features reflected the strain of recent events. "You were present with Sir Roderick on the night of the fire," Holmes began without preamble. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, we were reviewing the Eastern shipping contracts, complex negotiations requiring Sir Roderick's personal attention. We had been at work perhaps 2 hours when we smelled smoke. Vale's fingers, I noticed, bore the faint calluses of one who plays stringed instruments regularly. You play music, Mr. Vale." "The violin, indifferently. It calms the mind after figures." He gestured toward a leather case in the corner. I bring it when late work is expected. Sir Roderick does not grudge a Bach fugue at midnight. Holmes's eyes sharpened slightly. Your quarters include a small workshop, I believe. A modest collection of scientific curiosities, Vale admitted readily. Acoustics fascinate me. The mechanics of sound transmission, the properties of various materials. I've experimented with gut strings, phosphoric compounds for luminescent effects, even harmless vapors that create temporary disorientation. Purely academic interests, you understand? Miss Vance followed, her delicate features composed despite evident strain. Holmes's manner softened as he addressed her. Miss Vance, I understand your father maintained correspondence with Lady Margaret despite their estrangement. Papa felt great remorse in his final months, she replied quietly. They had quarreled before his departure, a family matter concerning Aunt Margaret's past. Papa blamed her for the death of her former fiancé, Lieutenant Hartwell, claiming she had challenged his courage in letters, driving him to seek dangerous service in Afghanistan. The accusation was cruel and unjust, but it poisoned their relationship. Your father's final communications. He spoke of making amends, of revealing truth that had been concealed. His last letter to Aunt Margaret was dispatched just days before his death in early October. If it reached her, it would have arrived shortly before the fire. And during these manifestations, have you detected familiar elements in the whispers? Miss Vance started visibly. How extraordinary, you should ask. Yes, there have been moments when the voices seem to carry Papa's cadence, though surely grief influences my imagination. Following the interviews, Holmes conducted a thorough examination of the house's upper regions. In the dusty attic above the Rose Room, his methodical search revealed several crucial discoveries. From a fissure in the joists, he extracted a fragment of paper bearing traces of phosphoric compound and faint pencil marks. Near the chimney stack, he found evidence of recent disturbance in the accumulated dust and, most significantly, a length of fine gut string fitted with a minute wire hook. "A communicator's device, Watson," he explained, demonstrating how the mechanism could manipulate the bell system from above. Drawn upward, it could lift a weighted thread in the flue to activate the indicator below. Ingenious and virtually silent. Returning to the scullery, Holmes discovered a broken crate marked Willoughby and Fenn, containing traces of fish oil applied within the past week, the lubricant that had enabled the bell mechanism's unauthorized operation. As evening approached, Holmes gathered us in the library, his expression grave. "Watson, I observe you forming conclusions about Mr. Vale's obvious access to the necessary materials and knowledge. But consider, a truly cunning criminal does not merely conceal their tracks. They lay false ones. A suspect who presents himself so readily, with all the necessary tools and admissions, often does so because he wishes to divert attention from the true orchestrator." He moved to the window, gazing into the fog-shrouded square. The whispers speak of unfinished business, letters that arrived too late, and family secrets demanding resolution. Someone in this household knows precisely what Captain Vance's final message contained, and they are using elaborate deception to ensure its contents are revealed. Tomorrow we shall discover whether they seek truth or concealment. The game, as Holmes would say, was growing more complex by the hour. The fourth evening of our investigation found Holmes in a state of methodical preparation that I had witnessed only when he approached the resolution of a particularly complex case. He had spent the afternoon in careful consultation with various technical manuals, and I observed him making precise measurements throughout the house with a surveyor's tape and compass. "Watson," he announced as the November dusk settled over Bedford Square, "tonight we shall conduct a controlled experiment that will either confirm my theories or require their complete revision. I've arranged for the household to gather in the drawing room at precisely 11 o'clock, leaving the upper floors entirely unobserved, save for our own presence." His preparations were characteristically thorough, yet subtle. Across the corridor leading to the Rose Room, he stretched two nearly invisible threads of silk at ankle and shoulder height. Along the wainscoting, he applied a thin line of fine salt that would reveal the slightest air current. Most intriguingly, he positioned a small mariner's compass near the servant's bell board, its needle steady in the gaslight. "The compass, Holmes?" I inquired, though I suspected his reasoning. "Iron betrays its presence through magnetic disturbance, my dear fellow. If mechanical devices are being manipulated nearby, the needle will respond accordingly." He then produced a small brush and dusted the bell mechanism with the finest coating of lampblack, to capture the ghost's fingerprints, as it were. At the appointed hour, the household assembled in the drawing-room with evident apprehension. Sir Roderick paced before the fireplace, his agitation poorly concealed. Miss Vance sat rigidly upright, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mrs. Larkin maintained her stalwart composure, though I detected a slight tremor in her usually steady voice. Mr. Vale positioned himself near the mantelpiece, his pale features composed but watchful. Blount stood at attention by the door, ready to respond to any summons. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes addressed them with grave formality, "Watson and I shall maintain our vigil in the corridor above. Under no circumstances is anyone to leave this room until we return. The success of this experiment depends upon your complete cooperation." We took our positions in the shadowy hallway, Holmes having reduced the gas to create an atmosphere of expectant gloom. The house seemed to hold its breath, every timber and joint settling into watchful silence. Then, as the distant church bells tolled midnight, the familiar manifestations began. The whispers commenced as they had before, soft, sibilant sounds like silk brushing against silk. But tonight, with our heightened attention and Holmes's strategic positioning, I could detect subtle variations in their source and character. Sometimes they seemed to emanate from the sealed room itself, other times from the walls, and occasionally from above our heads. "Observe the compass, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible. The needle, which had remained steady throughout our vigil, suddenly gave a minute tremor and shifted several degrees eastward. Simultaneously, a faint metallic click echoed from the direction of the bell board, followed by the soft scrape of the rose room indicator dropping halfway down its track. Holmes moved with cat-like precision to examine the mechanism. The lamp black revealed the faintest impression where something metallic had made contact, yet no human hand had approached the device. "Most illuminating," he whispered, producing his magnifying glass to study the mark more closely. From below came a muffled exclamation of surprise, indicating that the household had witnessed the bell's activation. Holmes raised his hand for silence and led me toward the narrow staircase accessing the attic spaces above the rose room. The upper regions of the house told their own story to Holmes's trained eye. His silk threads remained intact at ankle level, but the higher strand hung severed, indicating that someone of considerable height had passed this way recently. A faint, sickly sweet odor lingered among the rafters, not the harsh scent of chloroform, but something more subtle that might induce mild disorientation without complete unconsciousness. Holmes knelt beside the chimney stack, his lamp carefully shielded to avoid detection from below. In the accumulated dust of decades, fresh disturbances were clearly visible. The impression of knees where someone had crouched for extended periods, and more tellingly, a series of small holes drilled through the flooring at precise intervals. "A speaking system, Watson," he explained in barely audible tones. "The chimney flues create natural acoustic channels, while these carefully positioned apertures allow for the projection of sound that appears to originate from multiple locations simultaneously." He produced a length of fine wire from his coat and inserted it into one of the holes, manipulating it with delicate precision. From the corridor below came an immediate response, a soft scratching sound followed by the unmistakable whisper of my own name, though I had spoken nothing. "The mechanism is ingenious," Holmes continued, withdrawing the wire and examining its tip, which bore traces of a phosphoric compound. Sound can be projected, amplified, and redirected through this network to create the illusion of supernatural communication. The phosphoric residue provides brief luminescent effects when activated by friction or chemical reaction. We descended to find the household in a state of considerable agitation. The bell had rung twice more during our absence, and several members reported hearing distinct words among the whispers, names, fragments of conversation, and, most disturbingly, references to unfinished letters and hidden truths. Holmes gathered them in the library, his expression grave but determined. Ladies and gentlemen, I can now state with certainty that the manifestations you have witnessed are the product of human agency, not supernatural intervention. Someone in this household possesses both the technical knowledge and the emotional motivation necessary to create these elaborate deceptions. Sir Roderick started forward. You have identified the culprit? I have identified the method, Holmes replied carefully. The motive, however, remains partially obscured. These manifestations are not random pranks or attempts at simple deception. They serve a specific purpose, to draw attention to matters that someone believes must be brought to light. He moved to examine Lady Margaret's damaged escritoire, which had been brought down from the Rose Room for restoration. His fingers traced the warped wood with professional interest, pausing at a section where the fire damage seemed less severe than elsewhere. Watson, your medical bag, if you please. Specifically, the iodine solution. I provided the requested item, watching as Holmes applied several drops to a discolored area of the wood. The solution reacted immediately, revealing a faint but unmistakable reddish-brown stain that penetrated deep into the grain. Blood, I announced quietly, recognizing the characteristic reaction. Indeed, and not a small quantity, suggesting that Lady Margaret's final moments may have been more traumatic than originally supposed. Holmes straightened, his grey eyes reflecting the gravity of this discovery. The fire was not entirely accidental, and someone in this household knows far more about that night than they have previously revealed. Miss Vance had grown pale at this revelation, while Mr. Vale's usual composure seemed slightly strained. Sir Roderick stared at the stained wood with evident shock, and even Mrs. Larkin's stalwart demeanor showed signs of disturbance. The whispers speak of unfinished business, Holmes continued, because someone wishes to ensure that the truth about Lady Margaret's death and the circumstances that led to it will not remain buried with her. Tomorrow, we shall discover whether this elaborate deception serves justice or concealment. As the household dispersed in subdued silence, I found myself marveling once again at Holmes's ability to transform apparent impossibilities into logical sequences of cause and effect. Yet the true purpose behind this intricate charade remained tantalizingly beyond our grasp, promising revelations that would surely test even my friend's remarkable powers of deduction. The game, as Holmes would say, was approaching its most critical phase. The discovery of blood upon Lady Margaret's escritoire had transformed our investigation from a case of apparent supernatural manifestation into something far more sinister. Holmes spent the early morning hours in methodical examination of the damaged furniture, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail with the precision of a master craftsman studying a complex mechanism. "Watson," he murmured, running his fingers along the warped wood. "Observe the inlay work here. These roses are not merely decorative. They serve a more practical purpose." With delicate pressure, he manipulated a barely visible section of the marquetry. A soft click answered his touch, and a char-fringed panel sprang open to reveal a hidden compartment within the escritoire's structure. From this secret recess, Holmes extracted several fragments of paper, some completely carbonized, others bearing legible portions despite fire damage. His face assumed that expression of intense concentration I knew so well as he arranged the pieces with surgical precision. "Most illuminating," he announced, studying the largest fragment through his magnifying glass. In Lady Margaret's hand, "Roderick," I can keep silent no longer. The proof lies not with me alone. The letters from India speak of—" and here the text becomes illegible. He indicated another piece. Hartwell's death was no accident. The supply routes, corruption reaches to— Again, the fire has claimed crucial details. At that moment, Mrs. Hudson's urgent knocking interrupted our examination. "Mr. Holmes, a telegram from Inspector Lestrade." The boy insisted it was most urgent. Holmes read the message with growing interest. "Fascinating timing, Watson. It appears that Captain Vance's effects, recently arrived from India, include documents that corroborate what these fragments suggest. Lestrade requests our immediate attendance at Scotland Yard." Within the hour, we found ourselves in Lestrade's cluttered office, where the inspector received us with uncharacteristic gravity. "Holmes, this business grows more complex by the hour. Captain Vance's final dispatch included evidence of systematic corruption in the military supply operations. Medical stores diverted for private profit, while soldiers died of preventable diseases. The documents proved damning in their implications. Captain Vance had discovered that Lieutenant Hartwell's death resulted not from reckless courage, but from his investigation into supply route corruption. Most significantly, several forged requisitions bore the signature R.A., initials that required no interpretation. "Sir Roderick's shipping empire," I breathed, recognizing the connection immediately. "Indeed, Watson. But observe the sealing wax on the packet containing this evidence." Holmes examined it under his lens. Lady Margaret's rose seal, yet applied after the original opening. Someone in the household read these contents before her death. Returning to Bedford Square, we found the atmosphere charged with barely concealed tension. Holmes immediately requested a private interview with Sir Roderick, whose usual commanding presence had diminished considerably under the weight of recent revelations. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Roderick began before we could speak, "recent events have forced me to examine certain aspects of my business dealings. If irregularities have come to light, I am prepared to make full disclosure." Holmes settled into his chair with predatory stillness. "Your confession comes rather late, Sir Roderick. The question is not whether you profited from diverted supplies. The evidence is conclusive, but whether you are willing to commit murder to prevent exposure." The baronet's face went ashen. "Murder? Surely you cannot suspect." "I observe and deduce," Holmes replied coldly. "Lady Margaret received her brother's evidence, confronted someone in this household, and died as a direct result. Mr. Vale entered at that moment with tea service, his pale features composed despite the gravity of our conversation. Holmes watched him with particular attention as he arranged the cups with practiced precision. "Mr. Vale, your technical skills extend far beyond secretarial duties. Acoustics, chemistry, mechanical engineering, a combination perfectly suited for creating supernatural illusions." Holmes accepted his tea with a slight nod. "The question becomes, were you acting independently or protecting someone else while ensuring the truth eventually emerged?" Vale's hands remained steady, though I detected the faintest tremor in his voice. "My scientific interests are well documented, Mr. Holmes." "Indeed, almost as if you wished to establish your capabilities while directing suspicion elsewhere." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "The manifestations you created were ingenious. The acoustic system projecting voices through the chimney network, phosphorus compounds creating luminescent effects, mechanical manipulation of the bell system, but they served a purpose beyond mere deception." The tension in the room had become almost palpable. Sir Roderick sat rigid, his eyes moving between Holmes and his secretary with evident apprehension. They were designed to focus attention on Lady Margaret's final correspondence, Holmes continued, and to compel revelation of the truth surrounding her death. The whispers spoke of unfinished business because someone knew that justice had not been served. Vale set down his cup with careful precision. "And if someone felt that justice demanded revelation of hidden truths, Mr. Holmes?" then that someone chose a remarkably complex method, unless they were simultaneously protecting the guilty while ensuring eventual exposure. Holmes's grey eyes blazed with cold fire. The elaborate charade served dual purposes: to shield the true murderer from immediate suspicion while gradually building toward inevitable revelation. As the implications settled over the room like a shroud, I realized that Holmes had maneuvered all the principal players into position for the final revelation. The supernatural manifestations had been both shield and sword, protecting one while condemning another. The game, as my friend would say, was approaching its most critical and dangerous phase. The hours following our discoveries passed in a state of peculiar tension, with Holmes exhibiting that restless energy I'd come to associate with cases approaching their critical juncture. He disappeared for several hours after dusk, returning near midnight with mud upon his boots and a satisfied expression that suggested productive investigation. Upon the table, he placed a folded document bearing the unmistakable crest of Allardyce and Company. "The gentlemen at Tilbury possess remarkably detailed records, Watson," he observed, lighting his pipe with deliberate precision. "Ship manifests, cargo inventories, and most illuminating of all, correspondence regarding medical supply diversions that certain officials at Whitehall would prefer remained buried. Our friend Sir Roderick has been far busier than even his wife suspected." The following day brought a terse note from Inspector Lestrade. "Warrant secured. Tonight at 10. Ensure Sir R. remains available." Holmes read it, penned a brief reply postponing the arrest until midnight, and spent the remainder of the day in methodical preparation that filled me with both anticipation and apprehension. His arrangements were characteristically thorough yet subtle. He positioned nearly invisible silk threads across the corridor at varying heights, applied fine lines of salt along the wainscoting to detect air currents, and, most intriguingly, placed a small mariner's compass near the servant's bell-board, where its needle remained steady in the gaslight. "Iron betrays its presence through magnetic disturbance," he explained when I inquired about the compass. "Should mechanical devices be manipulated nearby, we shall have immediate indication." He then dusted the bell mechanism with the finest coating of lamp black, to capture our ghost's fingerprints, as it were. As evening approached, Holmes's demeanor grew increasingly focused. He eyed, tested air currents with wisps of cotton, measured distances with surveyor's precision, and examined the Rose Room's sealed entrance with the intensity of a surgeon studying a complex operation. "Watson," he said quietly as the household gathered for dinner, "tonight we shall witness the final performance of our supernatural drama. When the manifestations begin, remain at my right side, and should I command you to go low, drop to your knees without hesitation. There will be vapors involved, and I suspect they are designed for more than mere atmospheric effect." At precisely 11 o'clock, the familiar whispers commenced, but tonight they carried an urgency that had been absent before. The sounds seemed to flow along the corridor like water seeking its level, gathering strength as they approached the Rose Room door. Then came the distinctive metallic click from the bell board, followed by the smooth descent of the Rose Room indicator. Holmes was in motion before the mechanism had settled. "Observe the compass, Watson," he murmured, and indeed the needle gave a pronounced tremor before shifting several degrees eastward, confirming the presence of ferrous materials in proximity to the device. The household had assembled at the sound, Sir Roderick pale but determined, Mr. Vale maintaining his characteristic composure, and Miss Vance visibly distressed by the increasingly urgent nature of the whispers. Mrs. Larkin and Blount flanked the group, their faces reflecting the strain of recent events. "Back, all of you," Holmes commanded sharply, indicating the line of salt he had positioned along the corridor. "No one is to cross this threshold." But even as he spoke, Miss Vance, seemingly overcome by the clarity of the whispers calling her uncle's name, darted forward toward the door. Holmes's hand shot out, but missed her by inches. I managed to intercept her just as her fingers touched the door panel, but not before a sickly sweet odor erupted from the keyhole, accompanied by soft hissing sound. Miss Vance's knees buckled immediately, and I dragged her back while pressing my vial of ammonia salts to her nostrils. Holmes, moving with cat-like precision, thrust a folded silk handkerchief into the keyhole to block the vapor's source, then crushed a small, glowing device that had begun to smolder within the rose room's damaged hearth. The acrid smell of extinguished phosphorus filled the air as he lifted a small saucer with gloved hands. "Lamp oil mixed with turpentine," he announced grimly. "Crude but effective for creating both luminous effects and rapid combustion." The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by scurrying sounds from the attic above and the distinct impression of weight shifting among the rafters. Holmes's expression sharpened with predatory intensity. "To the attic," he commanded softly. Our ascent revealed the full ingenuity of the deception. Among the dusty beams, Holmes discovered a sophisticated network of fine wires leading to a small clockwork device affixed beneath a joist with beeswax. The mechanism's spring had partially wound down, its timing wheels still visible in the lamplight. "A delayed activation system," Holmes explained, examining the device with professional admiration. "The clockwork triggers multiple effects in sequence: the acoustic projections, the chemical vapor release, and the mechanical manipulation of the bell system below." He indicated several tiny holes drilled through the flooring at precise intervals. "Sound projection points, Watson. The whispers originate here and are channeled through the chimney flues and wall cavities to create the illusion of multiple voices speaking from within the sealed room." Most significantly, he extracted from a crevice in the joists a length of gut string fitted with a minute wire hook, its surface dusted with crystalline residue that glittered in the lamplight. "Chloroform and ether mixture, crystallized upon the thread," he observed. "When activated by the clockwork mechanism, it releases vapors designed to create disorientation and suggestibility." Miss Vance's reaction was entirely predictable and entirely planned. Returning to the library, we found the household in various states of distress and apprehension. Holmes positioned himself before the fireplace, his lean figure commanding attention through sheer force of personality. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we have witnessed the final act of an elaborate deception designed to serve justice through unconventional means. The supernatural manifestations were indeed created through human agency, but their purpose transcended mere trickery." He withdrew from his coat a fragment of charred paper I had not seen before. This was concealed within the clockwork device, a portion of Lady Margaret's final letter, preserved by its orchestrator for precisely this moment. In her hand, "The proof lies not with me alone. Others know the truth of Hartwell's death and Roderick's corruption." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the measured ticking of the mantelpiece clock. Sir Roderick had grown ashen, while Mr. Vale's usual composure showed signs of strain. Miss Vance, now fully recovered from her exposure to the vapors, watched Holmes with an expression of fearful anticipation. "The question that remains," Holmes continued, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight, "is not who possessed the technical knowledge to create these manifestations. That much is evident. The crucial question is who possessed both the emotional motivation and the moral conviction necessary to orchestrate such an elaborate revelation of truth." He moved to examine Lady Margaret's damaged escritoire once more, his fingers tracing the hidden compartment with practiced precision. "Tomorrow, when Inspector Lestrade arrives, with his warrant, we shall discover whether justice has been served or merely delayed. But tonight, the whispers from the room that burned have spoken their final words, and the truth they sought to reveal can no longer be contained." As the household dispersed in subdued silence, I found myself marveling once again at Holmes's ability to transform apparent impossibilities into logical sequences of human action. Yet the true purpose behind this intricate deception remained tantalizingly beyond complete understanding, promising revelations that would surely test even my friend's remarkable powers of deduction in the chapters yet to unfold. The morning following our discoveries in the attic found Holmes in a state of methodical preparation that I recognized as the prelude to final revelation. He had spent the early hours crafting what he termed the ultimate test, preparing a sealed document that appeared to contain Lady Margaret's reconstructed final letter. With meticulous care, he applied an invisible chemical reagent to the packet's seal, a compound that would bloom violet upon contact with warm skin. "Watson," he announced, placing the false evidence prominently in Sir Roderick's desk drawer, "tonight we shall discover whether our phantom seeks truth or concealment. Word has been carefully spread throughout the household that this packet contains the complete reconstruction of Lady Margaret's accusations, to be delivered to Inspector Lestrade at dawn." As evening approached, Holmes positioned his customary detection devices throughout the corridor. Silk threads at varying heights, lines of salt to reveal air currents, and the mariner's compass near the bell mechanism. "Our orchestrator has grown bold through success," he observed. "Tonight, desperation will overcome caution." At precisely midnight, the familiar manifestations commenced with unprecedented urgency. The whispers seemed to carry actual words now, fragments of conversation, names spoken with desperate clarity, and most distinctly, repeated references to the letter and Uncle Roderick's safety. The bell mechanism activated with its characteristic metallic click, but tonight the Rose Room indicator dropped with unusual violence, as if manipulated by trembling hands. Holmes moved with cat-like precision toward the study, where his trap awaited. Through the partially open door, we observed a slender figure moving with practiced stealth toward the desk. The false packet disappeared into concealing folds of fabric, but not before Holmes's lamp revealed the violet stain blooming across delicate fingers that belonged unmistakably to Miss Iris Vance. "Miss Vance," Holmes said gently, stepping into the lamplight, "your loyalty does you credit, but your methods have been discovered." The young woman turned, her face pale but composed, despite being caught in the act. "Mr. Holmes, you cannot understand the impossible position I found myself in. Uncle Roderick had been so kind to me, had given me a home when Papa died. I couldn't allow Aunt Margaret to destroy him based on Papa's accusations." Holmes nodded with characteristic understanding. "The night of the fire, Lady Margaret confronted your uncle with evidence of his corruption. You were present, perhaps summoned to witness the confrontation. When she threatened complete exposure, you acted to protect the only family you had left." "It was an accident," Miss Vance whispered, her composure finally cracking. She struck at Uncle Roderick with the brass lamp. I tried to intervene, to take it from her hands. We struggled, and she fell, striking her head against the hearth. The lamp overturned, spilling oil across her papers and the carpet. "And the fire?" I asked gently, my medical training recognizing the signs of profound psychological strain. I panicked. The spilled oil was already smoking from the fireplace embers. I thought if it appeared accidental, if the evidence was destroyed. Her voice trailed away into silence. At that moment, Mr. Vale appeared in the doorway, his pale features reflecting profound sadness rather than surprise. "She came to me afterward," he said quietly. "Hysterical, covered in soot, confessing what had occurred. I helped her clean herself, dispose of her stained clothing, and provided the alibi she needed." Holmes turned his penetrating gaze upon the secretary. "And then you discovered the full extent of Sir Roderick's corruption through your own investigation. You realized that Miss Vance had acted to protect a man whose crimes extended far beyond what she understood." "Indeed. Captain Vance's letters revealed the true scope of the supply diversions, the deaths that resulted from Sir Roderick's greed. I found myself protecting a murderess while knowing her victim had been seeking to expose genuine evil. Vale's voice carried the weight of moral exhaustion. The supernatural manifestations were my attempt to ensure justice while shielding Miss Vance from immediate consequences. You created an elaborate performance designed to gradually reveal the truth, while allowing time for, what? Escape, confession, redemption. Holmes's tone held no condemnation, merely professional interest. I hoped that gradual revelation might lead to voluntary confession, perhaps with mitigating circumstances. Miss Vance was barely more than a child, acting from grief and misguided loyalty rather than malice. Inspector Lestrade, who had been waiting in the shadows as Holmes had arranged, stepped forward with evident reluctance. "Miss Vance, I must place you under arrest for the murder of Lady Margaret Allardyce. Mr. Vale, you are charged as accessory after the fact." As the handcuffs were applied, Miss Vance looked up at Holmes with something approaching gratitude. "Thank you for understanding why I acted as I did, Mr. Holmes. Uncle Roderick's crimes were his own, but I couldn't bear to see him destroyed by them." Holmes watched the proceedings with characteristic detachment, though I detected a note of sadness in his grey eyes. "The whispers from the room that burned have finally spoken their truth, Watson. Justice has been served, though not in the manner any of us might have preferred." As the household was led away into the November night, I found myself reflecting upon the complex moral landscape we had navigated. The supernatural manifestations had indeed revealed truth, but that truth encompassed not only corruption and murder, but love, loyalty, and the desperate measures people employ when conventional morality proves inadequate to address the complexities of human motivation. The case was concluded, yet its implications would resonate far beyond the confines of Bedford Square, reminding us once again that the greatest mysteries often lie not in apparent supernatural phenomena, but in the intricate and often tragic workings of the human heart. The arrest of Miss Vance left an unsettling quiet in the house at Bedford Square, yet Holmes exhibited none of the satisfaction I had come to associate with a successfully concluded case. Instead, he paced our sitting room with the restless energy of a man whose mind refused to accept the apparent resolution. When Inspector Lestrade departed with his prisoners, Holmes immediately requested the coroner's report and spent the remainder of the night in methodical examination of the physical evidence. "Watson," he announced as dawn broke over Baker Street, "Miss Vance's confession, however heartfelt, does not align with the physical facts of Lady Margaret's death. 3 observations refuse to reconcile with her account." He moved to our evidence table, where fragments of the case lay arranged with surgical precision. "First, consider the blood upon the escritoire. Your iodine test revealed deep penetration into the wood grain, not the smearing one would expect from a fallen head, but a constellation of fine droplets with directional bias. This pattern indicates impact near the desk, not at the hearth where Miss Vance claims the struggle occurred. I recalled the distinctive spatter pattern with a physician's eye for detail. The trajectory suggests a downward blow delivered from above. Precisely. Second, observe the carbonized oil trail across the floorboards. The arc extends from the desk toward the hearth, not the reverse. A lamp overturned at the fireplace would have pulled differently. The fire itself testifies against Miss Vance's account. Holmes lifted the coroner's report, his grey eyes sharp with analytical intensity. Third, and most conclusively, the wound itself. A contusion to the right parietal region, angled downward with crescentic abrasion suggesting the lip of a heavy brass object. This injury required a tall right-handed assailant striking from above. The implications struck me immediately. Miss Vance is slight in stature, and I observed her writing with her left hand when she signed the police ledger. Indeed, her teacup, her gestures, her natural movements, all confirm left-handedness. The physical evidence absolves her of deliberate murder, Watson. Her confession, while noble in its intention to protect her uncle, cannot overcome the testimony of blood and flame. Holmes moved to examine Lady Margaret's damaged escritoire once more, his fingers tracing the hidden compartment with practiced precision. Consider also the locked door. The Rose Room's mechanism may be secured from without by anyone possessing the proper key. Sir Roderick keeps duplicates for all rooms. I observed the cabinet in his study, one hook conspicuously empty, labeled Rose. Then you believe Sir Roderick himself. The evidence suggests a confrontation that escalated beyond mere accusation. Lady Margaret had discovered the full extent of his corruption through her brother's letters. When she threatened complete exposure, he struck her down in desperate fury, then staged the fire to conceal his crime. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily upon me. And Mr. Vale's elaborate deceptions? Holmes's expression grew thoughtful. Vale possessed both the technical knowledge and the moral conviction necessary to orchestrate the manifestations. His acoustic systems, chemical compounds, and mechanical devices served a dual purpose: to protect Miss Vance from immediate suspicion while gradually forcing the truth into daylight. He suspected Sir Roderick's guilt but lacked concrete proof. The whispers spoke of unfinished business because Vale knew that justice had not been served. His supernatural theater was designed to wring a confession from the guilty conscience, yet it succeeded in extracting one from the wrong heart, a young woman whose only crime was misguided loyalty. Holmes gathered the evidence with methodical care, his movements reflecting the weight of revelation. Vale's devices never directly accused. They merely whispered of hidden truths and unfinished letters. He waited upon the courage of others to speak, hoping that gradual revelation might lead to voluntary confession rather than legal prosecution. As morning light filtered through our windows, Holmes turned to face me with that expression I recognized as the prelude to decisive action. We have one day before Miss Vance faces formal charges, Watson. Time enough to arrange a final interview with Sir Roderick, one that will either confirm our deductions or require their complete revision. He moved to his desk, penning a brief note with characteristic precision. I shall inform him that certain shipping manifests have come to light and that a particular vessel clears the Thames tomorrow with passengers seeking more favorable jurisdictions. He will think of flight, of explanation, perhaps of desperate measures. Instead, he will find that the room which burned last year has more secrets to reveal than even he suspects. The game, as Holmes would say, was approaching its most dangerous and decisive phase. The whispers from the burned room had spoken their truth, but that truth encompassed not only corruption and murder, but the complex moral calculations that drive human beings to extraordinary actions in pursuit of what they perceive as justice. Tomorrow would determine whether our deductions could transform apparent resolution into actual truth. The final confrontation unfolded in Sir Roderick's study as the November evening settled over Bedford Square like a funeral shroud. Holmes had arranged the meeting with characteristic precision, ensuring that the baronet believed himself summoned to discuss shipping manifests and departure schedules. Instead, he found himself facing the methodical reconstruction of his wife's murder. Holmes entered with the quiet confidence of a master craftsman approaching his finest work. Sir Roderick sat behind his imposing desk, an unlit cigar trembling between his fingers, his usually commanding presence diminished by sleepless nights and mounting desperation. The room itself seemed to echo with unspoken guilt, every shadow pregnant with accusation. "Sir Roderick," Holmes began without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "your niece's confession yesterday evening was both touching and entirely false. The physical evidence tells a different story, one that places you, not Miss Vance, in the Rose Room during your wife's final moments." The baronet's composure, already strained by recent events, began to crack visibly. "Mr. Holmes, surely you cannot give credence to supernatural manifestations over sworn testimony." "I give credence to blood-spatter patterns that indicate a tall, right-handed assailant," Holmes interrupted coldly, producing a brass key bearing a distinctive violet stain. "To oil trails that flow from desk to hearth, not the reverse, to cranial injuries that require considerable force delivered from above by someone of your precise height and dominant hand. Holmes moved to the fireplace, his lean figure commanding attention through sheer force of personality. This morning, I treated your key cabinet with a chemical reagent. You retrieved the Rose Room duplicate today, Sir Roderick, the same key you used to lock the door after murdering your wife. Sir Roderick's face had gone ashen, yet he maintained his posture of injured dignity. These are wild accusations, Mr. Holmes. My wife died in an accidental fire. Your wife confronted you with Captain Vance's evidence on the night of November 15th, Holmes continued relentlessly. The letters detailed not merely corruption in the supply routes, but your direct complicity in Lieutenant Hartwell's death. When she threatened complete exposure, you struck her with the brass lamp. Once, with sufficient force to fracture her skull. Holmes indicated the bloodstain pattern with clinical precision. She fell beside her desk, bleeding profusely as she attempted to reach the servant's bell. You watched her die, Sir Roderick. Only when she grew still did you overturn the lamp, spill its oil across her papers, and ignite the blaze that would conceal your crime. At that moment, Inspector Lestrade entered quietly, having waited in the corridor as Holmes had arranged. Sir Roderick Allardyce, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The baronet's composure finally shattered completely. She was going to destroy everything, he cried, his cultured voice cracking with emotion. 30 years of building an empire, all to be sacrificed for the sake of wartime irregularities. Irregularities that cost lives, Holmes observed coldly. Lieutenant Hartwell died because he discovered your corruption. Your wife died because she possessed the moral courage to expose your crimes. As the handcuffs were applied, Sir Roderick looked up with something approaching genuine remorse. Margaret was always the better of us, Mr. Holmes. I failed her in life, and I failed her in death. Miss Vance appeared in the doorway as her uncle was led away, her face reflecting profound relief mixed with sorrow. Mr. Vale stood beside her, his pale features showing the strain of maintaining such elaborate deceptions while wrestling with impossible moral choices. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, Miss Vance said quietly, for seeing the truth when I could not bear to speak it myself. Holmes bowed slightly. The truth has a way of asserting itself, Miss Vance, though it sometimes requires considerable assistance. Mr. Vale's manifestations served justice admirably. His whispers from the burned room gradually forced the truth toward light, protecting you while exposing the genuine culprit. As we prepared to depart Bedford Square, Holmes paused at the threshold, gazing back at the elegant Georgian facade that had harbored such dark secrets. The room that burned last year has finally surrendered its secrets, Watson. The whispers that haunted these halls have spoken their final words, and justice, though delayed, has at last been served. Walking through the fog-shrouded streets toward Baker Street, I found myself reflecting upon the complex moral landscape we had navigated. The supernatural manifestations had indeed served justice, though through means as intricate as the crimes they sought to expose. Truth, like justice, sometimes wears disguises that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about evidence and proof. The game, as Holmes would say, had reached its inevitable and satisfying conclusion. The weeks following Sir Roderick's arrest brought a peculiar mixture of satisfaction and melancholy to our lodgings at Baker Street. Holmes spent the early mornings in contemplative silence, his violin producing haunting melodies that seemed to echo the moral complexities we had encountered. The case had concluded with justice served, yet the elaborate deception required to achieve that justice continued to occupy his analytical mind with troubling questions about truth and methodology. The trial itself proceeded with methodical efficiency, Sir Roderick's guilt established beyond reasonable doubt through the physical evidence Holmes had so masterfully interpreted. The baronet's confession, delivered with the broken dignity of a man whose carefully constructed empire had crumbled, revealed the full extent of his corruption. Military investigators uncovered a network of supply diversions affecting multiple theaters of operation, with profits channeled through shell companies that had cost countless lives through inadequate medical supplies and substandard equipment. The vindication of truth. Mr. Vale's testimony proved particularly compelling, his quiet dignity transforming what might have been viewed as criminal deception into something approaching heroic intervention. "I possessed technical knowledge but lacked legal evidence," he explained to the court. "The manifestations were designed to create psychological pressure upon the guilty conscience while protecting an innocent young woman from her own noble impulses." His description of the elaborate mechanisms fascinated even the judge. The clockwork devices hidden among the rafters, the network of acoustic channels that projected whispers throughout the house, the carefully calculated chemical compounds that created both luminescent effects and mild disorientation. Each element had been designed not merely to suggest supernatural intervention, but to gradually build psychological pressure toward inevitable confession. Miss Vance herself testified with remarkable composure. Her initial confession revealed as the desperate attempt of a grieving young woman to protect the uncle who had shown her kindness. The court recognized her false admission as the misguided response of a traumatized mind, and she faced no charges beyond the weight of her own conscience. The broader consequences. The revelations regarding the Allardyce shipping empire sent shockwaves through London society that extended far beyond the immediate family. Several high-profile arrests followed, and Parliament initiated reforms in military supply regulations that would prevent similar corruption in future conflicts. Lieutenant Hartwell received posthumous recognition for his courage in investigating the very crimes that had cost him his life, while Captain Vance's name was cleared of the accusations that had shadowed his final years. Holmes had been called to testify regarding the physical evidence, his analysis of blood patterns and fire damage providing the scientific foundation that demolished any remaining claims of accidental death. "The room spoke truly," he concluded. His testimony, though not through ghostly agency. The evidence written in blood and flame testified more clearly than any human witness to the crime committed within those walls. Personal resolutions. In the aftermath, Miss Vance chose to accept an invitation from distant relatives in India, seeking a fresh beginning far from the shadows of Bedford Square. Mr. Vale, his charges reduced to a suspended sentence in recognition of his cooperation and moral motivation, accepted a position with a respected firm of engineers where his technical skills found more constructive application than supernatural theatre. The house itself stood empty now, its elegant Georgian facade hiding rooms that held only memories of tragedy. The Rose Room remained sealed, though no longer by boards and mortar. The weight of its history proved barrier enough to potential occupants. Philosophical reflections. "Watson," Holmes observed one evening as we sat before our familiar fire, "the Allardyce case presents us with a fascinating study in the relationship between justice and truth. Vale's manifestations were fraudulent in their supernatural claims, yet they served truth more faithfully than conventional investigation might have achieved." He drew thoughtfully upon his pipe, the smoke curling upward in the lamplight. "Consider the sequence without his intervention. Sir Roderick's crime would have remained concealed indefinitely, Lady Margaret's death accepted as tragic accident, and Miss Vance would have carried her burden of false guilt in silence. The whispers from the burned room, however artificial their origin, spoke more honestly than any human witness. The final word. As winter settled over London and new cases began to demand our attention, the Allardyce affair took its place among those investigations that had challenged not merely our deductive abilities, but our understanding of the complex relationship between truth, justice, and the extraordinary measures human beings will employ in pursuit of both. The room that burned had finally surrendered all its secrets, its whispers heard no more. Yet the lessons it taught about the intricate workings of conscience, loyalty, and moral courage would resonate far beyond the confines of Bedford Square. reminding us that the greatest mysteries often lie not in apparent supernatural phenomena, but in the depths of the human heart itself. As if summoned by our reflections, Mrs. Hudson's familiar knock announced the arrival of our next client, and Holmes's eyes brightened with renewed purpose. The game, as he would say, was never truly finished, merely paused between movements in the endless symphony of human mystery and detection.